Margaret Ellis stood at the entrance of the gleaming corporate tower, her heart beating steadily against her ribs. At 52, she had learned to measure her steps carefully, both literally and figuratively. The morning rain had soaked through her worn leather shoes during the long walk from the bus stop. She paused for a moment, feeling the dampness seep through to her stockings. The lobby stretched before her like a marble cathedral. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the polished floor. Margaret had never seen anything quite so grand. She worked her fingers around the handles of her simple canvas tote bag, the same bag that had carried her children's school supplies years ago, and now held her resume and a thermos of coffee she'd made at 4 in the morning. As she approached the reception desk, Margaret became aware of the soft murmur of voices behind her. 33 candidates had been invited for this final interview round. She turned slightly and saw them, a sea of sharp suits and confident smiles. Young men and women with leather briefcases and phones that seemed permanently attached to their ears. "Margaret Ellis," she said softly to the receptionist. "A kind-looking woman about her own age. Elevator bank C, 42nd floor," came the reply, accompanied by a warm smile. "Good luck, dear." The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. Margaret found herself surrounded by the other candidates. She could hear fragments of conversation, talk of advanced degrees, international experience, technological innovations she barely understood. She pressed herself quietly into the corner, her canvas bag clutched a bit tighter. When the doors opened, they all filed into a waiting area that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below. Margaret took a seat near the back, away from the clusters of networking conversations. That's when she noticed them looking. It started with sideways glances, then whispered comments. A young man in an expensive suit nudged his companion and pointed, not so subtly, toward Margaret's feet. Her shoes, once a respectable brown, now showed every year of their faithful service. The leather had cracked along the sides, and the morning's rain had left dark water stains across the toes. "Did you see her shoes?" she heard someone whisper, followed by barely contained laughter. Margaret felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her gaze steady on the window. She had learned, through years of raising 3 children on her own after David passed, that dignity was not something others could take from you. It was something you either held on to or gave away. More laughter rippled through the group. A woman with perfectly styled hair leaned over to her companion. "I mean, really, how do you come to an interview like this looking like that?" Margaret thought of her morning. Up at 4:30 to make breakfast for her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived alone and struggled with her arthritis. Then the 40-minute bus ride because her old Toyota was in the shop again. She'd brought an extra sandwich in case someone at the interview looked hungry. It was still wrapped carefully in her bag. "Margaret Ellis?" A professional-looking woman appeared at the doorway. Margaret rose, feeling every eye in the room follow her movement. The whispers seemed to grow a bit louder as she walked across the waiting area, her worn shoes making the softest padding sound against the plush carpet. The walk down the hallway felt endless. Margaret could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, but she kept her shoulders straight. She had survived harder things than judgmental glances from strangers. The conference room was impressive, a long mahogany table surrounded by high-backed chairs. But Margaret's attention was immediately drawn to the man sitting at the head of the table. Thomas Richardson, the CEO, was probably in his early 60s. His silver hair was neatly combed and his suit was clearly expensive. But it was his eyes that caught Margaret's attention. They were kind eyes, the sort that seemed to notice things. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice carried the gentle authority of someone who had learned that power was best wielded with wisdom. Margaret sat carefully, placing her canvas bag on the floor beside her chair. "I apologize," Thomas said, "but I couldn't help noticing. You walked here from quite a distance this morning, didn't you?" Margaret felt her face flush again. "The bus stop is about 8 blocks away. I hope I'm not late, sir." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You're exactly on time." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Tell me, Margaret, why do you want this position? It was a question she had prepared for, but somehow, sitting across from this man with the kind eyes, Margaret found herself speaking from her heart instead of from her practiced script. "Mr. Richardson," she began slowly, "I've spent the last 15 years working in customer service. Not glamorous work, perhaps, but I've learned that every person who calls or walks through our door is carrying something. Hope, frustration, worry, sometimes desperation. They need someone who will really listen, really care." Thomas leaned forward slightly, his attention fully focused on her words. "I know I don't have the advanced degrees that the other candidates probably have," Margaret continued. "I finished my bachelor's degree at night school when my youngest started high school. It took me 6 years, but those 6 years taught me something valuable. That persistence and genuine care often matter more than brilliance." She paused, thinking of Mrs. Chen struggling with her morning medications, of her son Michael working 2 jobs to pay for community college, of all the small acts of kindness that wove through her days like golden thread through ordinary fabric. "I believe this company serves people," she said quietly. "And I've spent my whole adult life learning how to serve people well." Thomas was quiet for several moments. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Margaret, I have to ask. Did you hear the comments in the waiting room about your shoes?" Margaret's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "Yes, sir, I did. How did that make you feel?" It was an unexpected question, and Margaret took her time answering. "Sad," she said finally. "Not for myself exactly. But sad that in a room full of educated, accomplished people, the first instinct was to judge and mock rather than show kindness to a stranger." Thomas nodded slowly. "I've been watching the security camera feeds from the waiting area," he said. "I like to observe how candidates interact when they think no one important is watching." Margaret's heart sank. She was certain this was leading to her dismissal from consideration. "I saw something interesting," Thomas continued. "While others were commenting on your appearance, you quietly helped an elderly man who dropped his papers near the elevator. You offered your seat to a woman who seemed nervous. And you gave your bottle of water to the young man who was clearly having an anxiety attack in the corner." Margaret blinked in surprise. She hadn't thought anyone had noticed those small moments. "You see, Margaret," Thomas said, leaning back in his chair, "I can teach someone spreadsheets and software programs. I can provide training on company policies and procedures. But I cannot teach character. I cannot teach genuine kindness. And I cannot teach the wisdom that comes from facing life's challenges with grace." He stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. 30 years ago, I was a young man in an expensive suit, sitting in a waiting room much like the one outside. I was supremely confident, maybe even arrogant. There was an older woman there, probably about your age now, in a simple dress and worn shoes. I'm ashamed to say I judged her just as harshly as those candidates judged you today." Thomas turned back to face Margaret. "She got the job, and she became one of the finest employees this company ever had. She taught me that real strength isn't found in designer clothes or impressive degrees. It's found in how we treat others when we think no one is watching." Margaret felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she held them back. "The position comes with a substantial salary increase," Thomas said, returning to his seat. "Health insurance, retirement benefits, and 2 weeks paid vacation to start. But more than that, Margaret, it comes with the opportunity to help shape how this company treats people, both our employees and our customers." He extended his hand across the table. "If you'll have us, we'd be honored to have you join our team." Margaret reached across the table and shook his hand, feeling the firm, warm grip of someone who had learned to recognize what truly mattered in life. "Thank you." "Mr. Richardson," she said softly, I think this is exactly where I'm meant to be." As she gathered her canvas bag and prepared to leave, Thomas called her name once more. "Margaret!" "Those shoes. They've carried you through a lot of miles, haven't they?" She smiled, really smiled, for the first time that morning. "Yes, sir. They have." "Well then," he said with a gentle chuckle, "they're clearly good shoes. The best kind, I'd say. The kind that keep you grounded while they take you exactly where you need to go." Walking back through the waiting room, Margaret noticed the stairs again. But this time she met them with quiet confidence. She had learned something that morning that she would carry with her always. that true worth is never diminished by the judgment of others, and kindness, genuine quiet kindness, is noticed by the people who matter most. The elevator doors closed softly behind her, and Margaret Ellis began the journey to her new life, one step at a time, in her faithful, worn, perfect shoes. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not with grand gestures, but with the simple courage to remain kind in a world that often forgets the value of gentleness.